Episode 7, Fall of the Gamma Fiend. The camera cuts to 4 members of a known anti-mutant group battered and beaten fleeing through a North Haven street. Trailing them is a jeep full of mutants hooting and hollering in an antagonizing manner. Just before all 4 victims could turn down an alleyway, a bright yellow-skinned mutant in the passenger seat of the jeep leans out and fires a strange spiky creature from its mouth that hurls into the back of its target's neck, sending him to the ground. The creature, resembling some sort of alien crab, begins drilling into the man's neck with sharp pincers pulling out chunks of his neck tissue down to the bone. The other 3 escape to a dead end, hopeless and out of breath. The mutant assailants hop out of the vehicle and walk down the alleyway, stepping over the man being eaten by the creature, when we hear horrible screams coming from the alleyway. We then cut to a smiling advocate on live television being interviewed, sitting with his legs crossed, sipping on an alcoholic beverage. A mature interviewer asks Advocate about how he feels about the mutant on non-mutant violence. Advocate replies swiftly and tactfully. He speaks on how there must be pain and bloodshed to weed out the hate in our community. He adds that harmony can only be achieved by silencing those off-tune. Surprisingly, despite how savage the tone of Advocate's words were, the message was received well, as many viewers begin to agree and align their way of thinking with Advocate's. The camera cuts to various scenes of non-mutants being rounded up and slaughtered in Advocate's name. Banners of Advocate get hung up all around the city, and people chant his name. Advocate commands the cameraman to focus in on him so that he can speak to his people. He takes a sip of his drink, and with a charming demeanor, he reminds the city there's no such thing as non-mutants. Every citizen was infected during the Great Gamma event, and if you are in denial, you are a monster, and no different than the one terrorizing the northern districts. Which reminds me, Advocate tightens his tie. Will someone please take care of that fiend? He's destroying my city. Or else our anti-mutant enemies will have nowhere to sleep. Whoever does this will have a place on my mutant enforcement team. See, I'm a nice guy. You can't say that I don't care. The crowd laughs maniacally as they are intoxicated by his overwhelming influence and charm. The camera cuts to a large group of anti-mutant protesters lined up on their knees. They have been rounded up to the edge of the quarantine zone by a small band of mutants holding them hostage. A small Haven military unit assigned to guard the barricade from the Gamma zombies are also present and are allowing the mutants to antagonize the hostages in the name of their future governor, Advocate. Which one of you want to walk into your new home first? You heard the governor. This is where you'll be sleeping from now on. The largest of the mutants approaches, carrying with it a Gamma zombie bound in chains as it violently reaches and bites at him, but is too weak to do so successfully. The hostages look terrified, and one of them are forced to evade a splash of Gamma sludge that spills out of the zombie's mouth. If none of you want to volunteer, then you all go in at once. How about that? He then begins to move his fingers, which appear to manipulate the clothing of the hostages, pulling them up and toward the barricade entrance. The large mutant lets the chains slack, allowing the Gamma zombie to pursue them, forcing them to put pep in their step. The zombie spits a glob of sludge that splashes onto the shoulders of a hostage, slowly eating and decaying their flesh as they scream in agony. The mutants begin laughing as they usher their victims to their deaths when suddenly everyone looks up. The camera cuts to what appears to be a large landmass slowly hovering over and descending from the sky. Upon it, a small, quaint, and old-looking cottage made entirely of stone, complete with a yard and front porch. It looked like the home you'd see in an 80s TV sitcom, frozen in time and encased in moss-covered stone, uprooted from the planet. What the hell is that? The camera cuts to Six, holding his new persona card in front of his face in dramatic fashion. Upon this card, you see an image of a mysterious structure labeled with a description written in a strange language. The House of Awe, Six says aloud as he walks slowly down the porch steps. The front door of the house slowly swings open, and out walks a small, humanoid being with odd and eerie otherworldly features. Its mouth and eyes open wide as piercing yellow light beams out of them. Everyone in the area, including the Gamma Zombie, is caught in the captivation of the house and are trapped in pure awe of its presence. Their eyes glazed over at the light emitting from the child. Six observes as his new persona proves to be effective and functioning the way the card says it would. Six points at the mutants and quotes his master. All mutants are not created equally. He then reaches in his pocket and draws his two other cards, summoning Imperator the Savage and Mind Mass beside him. Mind Mass telepathically forces the personas linked to each mutant out onto this plane of existence, in which swiftly they are sealed into the cards that Six holds out. Six then commands Imperator to slay all remaining mutants, as well as the hostages. Imperator leaps off of the floating house down toward his targets and begins to cleave and decimate the awestruck targets. Six doesn't even view his new caught persona cards and tucks them into his sleeve as the House of Awe begins to ascend back into the air and hovers away like a giant air balloon. Deathtude observes from the shadows and is pleased with the progress Six is making. He turns to one other masked scientist from earlier, who for the first time is not with the others, and tells him he has decided to make Six the leader of the Safe Haven Nest, and recruiting will now commence. The young masked scientist asks why they aren't making this decision with the others. Deathtude turns to look at him and says, because they will all be dead, and we'll have no home to turn to. We have to make our own home. The sky lights up as they both turn to see a large pillar of dark energy off in the distance by the Gamma Fiend. Buildings crumble and collapse as the Gamma Fiend rips through fancy high-tech buildings, shattering glass and crushing holographic billboards. The creature has brought its wrath to a commercial industrial district, sending its dwellers fleeing in panic and terror as mutant zombies pour into the streets, soaked in toxic purple mist. The camera cuts to the head of a Gamma Zombie hitting the ground hard, then being stomped into. The camera slowly pans up the leg, revealing it belongs to the Traveler, R-Type X, standing cloaked in his shadowy stranger garb, fully rejuvenated and in a totally different mind state. A little ripped and torn, his equipment scathed and soaked in blood and Gamma guts, R-Type stands before a horde of zombies attacking civilians and the Gamma Fiend rampaging off in the distance. R-Type has tracked it up to this point with an energy clone and retained everything he learned from his last encounter with the creature. However, despite almost destroying it, it has morphed into a totally different monster physically. Still large, approximately 7 stories tall, The Fiend is now a mass of arms and tentacles, with a gaping mouth full of thousands of razor-sharp fangs constantly spewing mist into the air, corrupting the minds of the inhabitants in the city. R-Type tightens the shroud covering his face and shakes the zombie sludge off of his foot. He begins walking toward the beast while slowly picking up the pace into a full sprint. R-Type recalls the monstrosities he faced on Monster Island and determines that it is more than appropriate to tap into his potential, now more than ever. Just as he reaches full speed and gets prepared to launch himself into the air, a small fleet of aircrafts arrive on the scene, hovering over the district and the Gamma Monster. An army load of Anarchy android shock drop troopers jump out of the floating bases and crash land into the streets and through the rooftops of buildings like meteorites. Without hesitation, they begin mowing down hordes of Gamma zombies. Some Gamma zombies manage to move in close but are no match for the androids' endurance and obvious resistance to the toxicity, and therefore are able to dismantle the zombies with various high-tech close-quarters weapons at their disposal. All the neon lights and the electronic ambience in the area begins to flicker and spaz out as the Queen, King, Rook, and Anarchy of 12 appear in R-Type's path. R-Type dribbles his eye across the androids of the King's hand, analyzing them carefully. R-Type also notices two bishops hidden off in the distance watching him through their scopes. R-Type's clones have remained undetected and are ready to unleash a devastating attack on the bishops when called for. Anarchy, suited in his exosuit, disengages his jet boots and steps in front of the King to face R-Type directly. You? You didn't get enough of B2 Brawler and Nomad? Leave this creature to someone with the means to destroy it, Anarchy shouts. The camera cuts to R-Type's eyes as he glares at Anarchy. He suddenly receives information from his surveying clones that Anarchy's android army and hovering base is securing the entire district and cleaning up the zombie attacks with ease. R-Type remains silent and then takes a step toward Anarchy and informs him that he is the one who would take out the Gamma Fiend. No help needed. The Queen, unsheathing its katana, and then the Rook, twirling its knives, step forward and fall in formation. Anarchy begins tampering with his wrist computers. R-Type looks at him impatiently. What do you hope to gain by engaging me? Just before the bishop, nestled in the darkness, could snipe R-Type X after his words, one of his clones nukes the area with an energy blast, obliterating the bishop entirely. R-Type X blank steps behind the Rook and punches it directly into its core and blows it up from the inside with an energy. He then blanks beside the Queen and is met with a flurry of katana slashes. But R-Type dodges them all. The Queen zips past R-Type and through the building behind him. Confused, R-Type turns away and begins to run toward Anarchy, the source of the problem, but is suddenly stuck in place. R-Type looks down to witness his sheathed blade is being pulled to the ground by a powerful magnetic force emitting from the King's shield, now glowing. Suddenly, a giant blue slash strikes and slices the entire building in half, and the Queen pushes the building over and onto the encumbered R-Type stuck in place. Giant dust clouds emerge from the building, crumbling, as more Gamma zombies are alerted and arrive on the scene. The camera cuts to R-Type X, hiding behind a vehicle observing Anarchy and his army mowing down oncoming zombies. The King detects R-Type, and Anarchy ignites a small explosive resting under the vehicle, sending R-Type flying into a wall. R-Type appears 10 feet behind Anarchy in the night and points his fingers like a gun and blasts a beam, but is intercepted by the Queen's katana and deflects it back at R-Type, but he smacks it away with his hand. The same hand he smacks it away with is sent flying into the air as the Queen slices it off. R-Type yells in pain just before his head is lopped off, then sliced into 3 chunks. just before dissipating and fading into energy. Suddenly, a large swarm of blue lotus petals made of shimmering energy emerges from up under the king, uprooting him from his defensive position by Anarchy. Another swarm of blue lotus energy petals dance around Anarchy, lifting him off his feet and shredding into his exosuit. This was R-Type's Senban Renge technique. 1,000 teeny blades of energy easily used to shred opponents at a distance and overwhelm defenses. The real R-Type X appears out of nowhere and launches himself like an energy-propelled rocket towards Anarchy. Just as R-Type closes in, the Senban Renge dissipates, sending the king crashing to the ground and dropping Anarchy to his feet as well. R-Type's launch falls short as he lands 5 feet short of Anarchy. He looks confused as to why he cannot manipulate his energy on mutant levels. Anarchy smiles and begins to laugh while shaking off the thousands of cuts he received. Just before he can explain that his powers have been nullified, R-Type X, like lightning, strikes Anarchy in the face, then sends a powerful kick into his torso. But the exosuit is too durable for it to be effective. Anarchy captures his leg and with enhanced reflexes and strength, breaks it into two before slamming him into the ground below him, keeping him within range of the nullifier field. Anarchy steps on R-Type's chest and beckons him to bring on as many clones as you like, ninja. The real R-Type sits hidden behind a counter in a destroyed storefront, sensing each of his clones being spotted by the king and queen, then cut down. The camera cuts to a close-up of Anarchy's smirk when he says, "I have this whole place bugged." Then cuts to R-Type peeking over the counter when a swarm bot crawls in front of his face and explodes. R-Type crawls out of a pile of debris and shakes off the minor concussion. He stands 20 yards across from Anarchy, hovering by the king and queen as their surroundings lay in ruin. He then dissipates, and the real unscathed R-Type walks out from the shadows and stands before Anarchy. R-Type X is yet to break a sweat, and has just now devised a perfect strategy using Libra from all the knowledge he had gained from his fight with the robots using his clones. R-Type and Anarchy stand before each other, glaring into each other's eyes, when suddenly everything freezes. We watch as Tempest grabs R-Type and Anarchy one by one, dragging them out of range of a giant sludge nuke hurling toward them both from above. The Gamma Fiend can be seen latched onto a tall industrial building, looking down on the two for the kill. Anarchy pulls them both to the side and begins to try and convince them both to assist in the destruction of the true problem, to show that mutants have their own agenda and do not act on behalf of Advocate. Tempest explains that he has the area secured. The camera cuts to multiple shots of various mutant gangs and supporters of Advocate here to take out the Fiend in his name, but are frozen in place by stepping into a temporal anomaly left by Tempest. Their equipment and belonging begins to age and weather as time is absorbed from its existence. A few of them have been trapped there for so long that they have decayed into old, frail cadavers because the time anomaly had absorbed the time from all of their equipment until it could only absorb from their life. Tempest explains that with their focused efforts, they can quickly and completely kill it. He listens closely to their emotions and can feel that they both truly agree. Tempest feels that they are logical enough to understand the circumstances, and so he unfreezes time. A giant glob of toxic sludge lands and engulfs the area that they previously resided in, causing the dead to reanimate and attack survivors again. Anarchy looks over at R-Type, but R-Type looks fixated on the Gamma Fiend. Tempest adjusts his white fedora and runs to the outside. The camera cuts to R-Type X in midair, evading hand and tentacle swings from the Gamma Fiend. An arm with bone spikes protruding out of it swings at R-Type X. But with his mastery of his mind and energy combined, he has tapped into a deeper power reserve and is utilizing his Libra knowledge from the previous encounter with it. R-Type lands a kick to the center of its mass, just above its mouth. It's like getting struck by lightning itself, stunning it for a period. Anarchy, flying over top of it, firing a blanket of swarm bots upon it as they latch onto as many appendages and explode, sending slime and blood flying everywhere. Armies of android soldiers can be seen firing high-powered rounds into the mass of arms. A large arm protrudes out of the Gamma Fiend and reaches out at the Queen, grazing her leg, when another hand grabs her entire body and begins crushing it in its fist until it explodes. Tempest takes a deep breath and begins to absorb massive time from the Gamma Fiend itself and transfers it to Anarchy and R-Type. The camera cuts to an ultra slow motion shot of R-Type X empowered by time, moving at vastly higher speed than his surroundings, inside of the Gamma Fiend's mouth, standing on its tongue, firing a volley of energy blasts, causing exceptional damage to the creature from the inside. Anarchy spots two approaching laser copters being piloted by Advocate supporters. Anarchy hijacks them with his mind and sends them kamikazing right into the monster while pelting it with laser beams on the way. The King, sitting upon the Knight, a large android steed, bolsters and enhances its android army as they coordinate their gunfire and aim at specific spots on the monster, weakening it immensely. Tempest stands on top of a truck, orchestrating his time absorption, when suddenly, Tempest is hit by a wave of sound. A short, pudgy man approaches from behind Tempest wearing a silly superhero costume and is screaming at the top of his lungs and guiding his supersonic waves toward Tempest, sending him directly to the ground. The man stops screaming once he sees blood pouring out of Tempest's ears. The man stands over Tempest and pulls him up by his collar and says, "Advocate will fight for this city." Tempest can barely hear him and is dazed and disoriented. A giant, brand new steel sink comes flying through the window out of the store display and smashes directly into the man's head, breaking open his jaw and taking off a large chunk of his head. Reacting and on the edge of death, the man begins to let out a terrible brain-melting scream as blood spits out of his mangled mouth. A trash can is thrown over his head and then with incredible magnetic force is crushed with the man's head inside, killing him. Tempest, recovering from his daze, stands to his feet and sees a stylish young man, rugged looking, with white hair, who appears to be a mutant with the power of magnetism. He tells Tempest not to worry, and that he's been a fan and supporter of his for some time. "My name is Chronicle, and I'm not a crazy Advocate supporter, but I refuse to let innocent people get hurt. And that's what's right. No one needs guidance to do what's right." He helps Tempest come to his senses and helps him to his feet, and then they turn their focus on the Gamma Fiend. Anarchy fires a cluster of bombs and swarm bots that practically obliterate a large portion of arms and tendrils and exposing some vital points of the creature. An older woman's torso can be seen dangling outside of the wound left by Anarchy upon the creature. The lower half of her body mutated into an abomination, and imprisoned her within this monster. This poor woman. Attached to her belly appears to be a giant, toxic gland that produces the mist that the Gamma Fiend is spewing. Her mutation is probably what gives it its toxic power. The king sends in troopers to cut it off and retrieve it for Anarchy, and they do so successfully. R-Type senses that this is the opportunity to finish it once and for all. R-Type performs a swift gesture with his hands and performs Aiza Dewajia, R-Type's ultimate technique. Spiritual energies capture the entire Gamma Fiend and begin to engulf it until it is completely sealed into a giant 30-story tall tower that manifests out of pure dark energy. The camera cuts to the entire Gamma Fiend aloft in a dark universe floating when dozens of mirrors appear all around the creature as it thrashes about endlessly floating in space. R-Type appears in the mirrors and steps out of each of them. But as he does, he is completely made of Iblis energy, devil energy. Iblis R-Type performs another hand gesture to trigger the War on All Fronts technique. Every existing energy that has existed within R-Type X shoots through the mirrors, piercing right through the Gamma Fiend and ripping out the spirit form of it, before completely shredding its spirit and body on both planes of time and space. A giant tower of black energy lingers for a bit before fading out, revealing the shredded remains of the Gamma Fiend. R-Type relaxes, his body tense, and he begins to breathe in the victory over the beast. He suddenly hears a faint yet familiar voice calling him off in the distance behind the building where he sees a faint glowing light. R-Type goes to investigate and is never seen again for some time. The camera cuts to android engineers, builders, and shock drop troopers taking over the district and reinforcing their army by building bases, herding civilians, and warding off law enforcement by violent means. Amidst the chaos of the Gamma Fiend, there is little healthy enforcement left, and the northern districts are in chaos. We then cut to Anarchy, Tempest, and Chronicle standing at the barricade. News reporters swarm them for commentary. However, Anarchy strongly suggests that they all leave the area now, and just as he says that, android troopers arrive and begin to forcefully usher away everyone. Tempest and Anarchy make eye contact as Anarchy slowly turns around and walks into the district currently being renovated and conquered by his advanced android empire. Suddenly, Tempest is pulled into a slew of interviews with Chronicle as they are both credited for assisting and saving North Haven. Many questions circulate as everyone speculates that Chronicle is a member of the new Gate Center. They ask Tempest if this is the kind of heroes that the Gate Center will produce. Tempest reassures them that only good things can come out of the center because education can show mutants how to be heroes like Chronicle. They take a picture of Tempest and Chronicle shaking hands amongst a wrecked and ruined North District. We cut to a large facility purchased and operated by the Roaring Dragons and nestled within an industrial district within South Haven like a dagger lodged in the belly of the blood-veined beast. Fuyonoichi Inc. Nagin and his son Makai have invested heavily in their war against their rival empire, Bloodvein. Arms and bioengineering are amongst many areas they pump their wealth into. We see the entire dragon army mobilizing and being fitted into weaponized battle tech suits. Chrome metal plating with blue light glowing along the ridges piercing through their visors. The Energirai Mark I battle suits are designed to suppress incoming energy and dampen the impact and effects. Standing before his entire army, now present before him, Nagin delivers a motivational and invigorating speech centered on vengeance for the death of his wife and their queen by the hands of the bronze samurai General Ma Jing. Nagin then calls his son to his side. Makai approaches and kneels before his father. Nagin pulls him up and looks at him directly into his eyes, where he witnesses the sea of scorching flames of his son's passion. This, my son, will be your stepping stone into the absolute. He hands Makai the family's legendary blade that has been recently modified with current technology, but retaining its godly material. The blade of Fuyonoichi is made of Kuroryu alloy and can only be wielded by a Fuyonoichi. Makai turns to his army with his sword in hand, its blade glowing with Makai's chi emitting through it. He holds his sword up and shouts, "Slaughter!" in his native Dorinthian tongue, as does everyone else. A blood-veined clansman runs up to Makai and informs him that there is someone here to see him. Makai allows their visitor to approach. A middle-aged man walks up to Makai and Nagin. He's 6 foot and wore light battle regalia under a long green trench coat and long black hair. He had sheathed a fancy broadsword on his back with a glowing red eye glancing around the room rapidly in the center of his hilt. He introduces himself as Judge Benedict Haynes, as he cockily walks up to shake Makai's hand. I am a GATE student and have been sent by Tempest to assist. He says it's essentially my first homework assignment. I'm 30 and haven't had homework in quite some time, but hey, how can I help? Makai smirks and introduces him to his father, Nagin. They reevaluate their plan of attack to include Judge Benedict. The camera then cuts to Makai and Nagin watching from a chopper amongst dozens as they invade Bloodvein headquarters from the skies and on land. The whole Roaring Dragons army is attacking the mansion as ninjas go toe-to-toe in the lawn and on the rooftops. Dragon copters sweep the whole perimeter, destroying and obliterating its enemies with a rain of fire. Dragon clansmen even attack from the sewer systems beneath the mansion, killing everyone they come across as they work themselves up into the building. Despite the surprise attack, Bloodvein is still evenly matched with the Dragon's clansmen. Bloodvein agents bring out the big guns, God Rifles. God Rifles are highly lethal nuclear rifles that fire green beams of energy that decimate their targets. Bloodvein agents break every window and lean out of them and rain nuclear energy upon the dragons. To their surprise, the army remain unaffected as the Energirai suits fully absorb the nuclear radiation and impact, powering them suits. Dragon clansmen zipline into the windows and cut down its inhabitants, continuing their raid. Beams of energy, heavy rounds, and destructive rockets slam into the mansion and destroy and shred everyone within. Nagin and Makai zip and dart around in perfect unison, cutting down their foes and breathing scorching flames of chi, roasting those they pass. Bloodvein's silver samurai, Pargaigus, leads the masked scientists to a special hidden escape route. And once they escape, he runs to secure Emperor Baiwang and General Ma Jing. Pargaigus and General Ma Jing stand back to back with young Emperor Baiwang in between. Pargaigus shouts over to General Ma Jing.
We will show them why we don the silver and bronze.
Makai and Nagin come crashing through the ceiling, completely engulfed in flames of their own dragon-empowered chi forms. General Ma Jing sees Nagin and runs toward the back exit. Nagin looks at Makai and tells him to go get him, and that he'll take care of Pargaigus, the traitor's accomplice. Surprised by General Ma Jing's betrayal and abandonment, Baiwang begins to cower and move closer behind Pargaigus. Pargaigus' helmet transforms into a full frontal mask with demonic features made of pure silver.
Nagin, your passion is weak, your mind is barbaric, and you had no place in our dynasty.
Nagin frowns. Pargaigus, you were lost. Your clan abandoned your search for the gods, and we have found it and embraced it. Pargaigus laughs.
Gods? Gods don't exist. Only science, and what we create by way of it.
Nagin flies towards Pargaigus and they clash swords 7 times before Pargaigus sends a wave of silver light from his katana hurling toward a dragon agent trying to snipe Emperor Baiwang, shredding him in half. Nagin breathes a wave of black fire at Pargaigus, who protects him and Baiwang behind a barrier of silver light. Pargaigus then sticks his sword into the ground and shouts,
Lightning stab!
As a giant lightning blade shoots out from under Nagin, ripping through his leg spiritually. The pain was so intense it sends him crashing to the floor as his whole leg goes numb. Judge Benedict appears by Nagin's side and holds up his sword. The eye of the blade glances at his leg and then shoots a stare back at Pargaigus, causing a lightning stab to shoot through the ground up under him. To which he parries with another lightning stab of his own, but it sends him flying back and crashing into a wall as the clash of magic explodes. The sword then looks at Nagin's leg again, then back at Emperor Baiwang, causing another lightning stab to pierce right through Baiwang completely. In slow motion, we see Baiwang struck with the deadly attack. His hair points straight, his eyes roll back in his head as his body spazzes from the electric shock, and he falls dead. Pargaigus leans forward and shouts,
No!
Nagin stands up and says, I will kill your entire lineage. He holds his hand out, facing towards Pargaigus, who's standing there engaged with his sword ready. When suddenly, Nagin summons a black flame, engulfing Pargaigus entirely. He drops his sword and spins in agony, summoning his silver force field. But is not effective as the black fire emerges from inside of his soul and eats him alive before falling into a heap of melted armor. The camera cuts to Makai darting through the corridors when he hears a loud stab and scream. As he turns the corner, he sees General Ma Jing on his knees with a large katana plowed through his belly. Across from him stands a blood dragon ninja, who Makai recognizes as one of his up-and-coming soldiers who has excelled for the past month or so. But he too appears to have been gravely wounded and falls to one knee in a puddle of his own blood. Makai runs to his soldier's aid and hands him some biomeds to stop the bleeding and remedy the pain and thank him for his service today. The soldier coughs up some blood and says, I'm I'm gonna need a drink later tonight. Mackay then turns to the gravely wounded General Ma Jing. Mackay's eyes and sword glow as he enters his empowered dragon state. Mackay shouts, "Burn in dragon's fury!" as he pushes his palms forward, emitting a wave of chi. General Majin's armor begins to disintegrate from the raging, burning chi coming from Mackay's hands. Without any more hesitation, Mackay lunges through him with his blade unsheathed and carves a dragon rune into Majin's torso, while shouting,
"Erupting dragon!"
Mackay stands behind him, sword glowing blue, and Majin stuck in place. As soon as Mackay sheathes his blade completely, Majin erupts eternally and explodes with blue chi energy, blowing his torso up completely. Next to his smoldering corpse lay a scroll. Mackay walks over and retrieves the scroll and says, "Haven is an ugly city with much potential." He looks at his fellow clansmen. Very soon it shall be under Roaring Dragon's rule. He tosses the scroll over to Nagin, who catches it as he walks into the room with Benedict. Nagin smiles. "Good. The next phase of our plans shall begin." The camera cuts to the Roaring Dragon's clan, drinking and celebrating the success of their invasion and revenge within the confines of their luxurious suite in the Funaichi Inc. facility. Nagin and Mackay promote the ninjas whose name is Taiyin Saichi to a general of their army. Nagin then announces that he is crowning Mackay as their new leader of the Roaring Dragons. Nagin informed Mackay that he has ordered for the remainder of the Roaring Dragons to arrive to Haven to serve their new king, and that it was an honor watching his son rise from the ashes of his enemies. Let us all toast. The whole hall toasts to their new leadership and begin to feast, drink, and entertain their beautiful Dorinthian women. A little tipsy, Mackay walks up to their new general, Taiyin, and begins speaking to him. Taiyin looks at him, blank-faced, and doesn't respond to anything Mackay is saying. Taiyin shoves Mackay backward. Mackay loses balance and stumbles back on his chair and then falls over. Everyone looks in shock. "What the fuck, Taiyin?" a close friend of Taiyin shouts. Mackay stands to his feet and suggests that maybe Taiyin had a little too much to drink, but then wonders if he himself as well has been drinking a little too much because the room starts spinning. Nagin holds his head and also gets terribly off balance before falling to the ground. One by one, clansmen begin to fall all over and cough up copious amounts of blood and wine. Nagin begins to have a seizure, and as he starts choking on his own blood, Mackay looks around the room as his clan falls to their deaths and also choke on their own blood, every single one of them. Taiyin walks around pushing people over and appears to be counting how many are in the room and how many are dying. When he reaches Nagin, he checks Nagin's pulse, then checks his stopwatch. Mackay realizes that they have all been poisoned. Mackay transforms into his empowered chi form, but cannot hold it for a second before it flickers out and he begins to violently cough up blood. Taiyin walks up to Mackay, looking down at him. His face begins to morph back into the original. Ryan Zaidi, the ultimate assassin. Ryan receives a call and answers it. He says into his phone, "It's done. Both clans have been wiped out. And I just received intel that the bulk of the Roaring Dragons were still in Dorinthia and are on their way here. That's not my problem, and that will be considered another job if you're interested." He then hangs hangs up the phone. Ryan walks out of the mess hall, past hundreds of dead Klansmen, and doesn't even look back before hitting the light switch off and closing the door. Mackay lay poisoned, dazed, and on the verge of a slow death amongst his brothers in darkness. The scroll sitting next to the throne, 10 feet away from a dying Mackay, begins to glow.